be ours with your life. Welcome again. I want to spend 5 minutes or so talking a little bit about like my perception of the initiative and where we're coming from, what I think where we could heading at, and then I want to use a few minutes and collect your ideas what we want to do with this workshop. I think a challenging factor, but also a very important and strong factor of what we're doing is that whatever we are doing because we want it. There's no agenda setting, there's no master plan that someone imposed us, there's no funding agency. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, is here on the campus today, but she isn't here because of us. We are free to do what we ever want to do, whatever we want to do. And that's true for the future, but that's also true for this workshop. So if you have ideas that you want to share, what you would like to achieve in these 2 days, you're welcome to do that in a second. So what is this openmod-initiative? You first could say it's a bottom-up grassroots initiative set up in 2014. The kind of constituting workshop in October last year in Berlin was where we came together, about half the size, and people were interested in data transparency. And after 2 days, we decided we should continue that work and set it up a little bit more formally, have a website, have a name, and we decided to name it Open Modeling Initiative. My interpretation of that group is that we are doing 3 things. First, we are, and maybe most importantly, we are a network. We are a network of people who share the same values and have the same goals, at least in respect of transparency, open data, open source. And we are using that network to exchange experiences, help out each other, and share frustration, and to hopefully make it a little bit less frustrating. We are also an interest group, and we are an interest group to promote these ideas vis-a-vis funding bodies, the public, other institutes, and we're trying to spread the idea of open data, open source. And I would be personally eager to kind of go ahead a little bit during these 2 days on the second pillar. And third, we plan to be a platform to share information, code, and data more consistently. There's many ideas in the room, for example, developing something like a benchmark model or a data platform using the soft and hard infrastructure that we have under this initiative. But as I said, most importantly, we are whatever we want to be, and we are what we make it out. Our short history and what we achieved since then. So the name, the website, and the email list, we only exist for half a year, and I believe we have achieved quite a lot. First, we're still here. That's quite a lot already. I've seen many initiatives and similar institutions be born with a lot of enthusiasm and then die afterwards because people got hired and people have a lot of stuff to do and people are busy, of course. And so I think it's quite a success that we're here and growing, and I'm especially happy to see a lot of international faces here and have a really European scope now. And the live stream was set up initially because there was someone who wanted to join from Australia even, but we agreed to have that online because of all the time and money costs involved in traveling for 2 days. We have also produced a lot of material that we're using. We have a very active email list. We have a website that works well, I believe, as a first contact point. We have this leaflet. A lot of you have been involved in setting that up, that we can use to explain what we are and why we're doing what we're doing when we talk to other people. So you're very much invited to use that, bring that along with you on conferences, and distribute that if you want to. People ask what you're doing. And we have a name and a logo that I think works and explains quite well what we're doing. We have also interacted with other institutions. We have two members of the initiative were with an interesting strategy meeting with an important German funding body. We'll talk about that in a second a little bit. We've talked to the Open Knowledge Foundation. They've been very busy and are not able to join this workshop, but we keep in touch. So institutions that work on the same issues, but not from an energy or not even from a scientific perspective, but from an open source perspective in different areas. And also one of our focus is an example for that. A representative from that institution will join around lunch and explain what they are doing. They are running the website opengov.de for those of you who've seen it. And many more. So I think we are kind of establishing ourselves as a reference point for open in the energy sector. I'm also especially happy to have so many people with a focus on data here. And we all know that data is the basis for what we're doing, and I'm happy that not only people there that want to use data, but also people there that have been creating data and are happy to share data. And I think it's very important to establish that link more closely and develop ways to cooperate better in the future. I'm glad and proud, I must admit, about the way this initiative and this workshop have emerged. We don't have any silverback, we don't have any VIPs backing that initiative. It's very much grassroots, it's very much bottom up. And I'm happy to see that something like a wiki-based agenda setting and time plan development has worked, and you don't have to send out a fancy lay out that PDF with the agenda, but more than set up the idea and contribute to what they would like to present. That's my ideas. For those of you who have been there from the beginning or from starting the last workshops, you're invited very much to add to that if you disagree with what I presented as my perceptions of what we are and what we want to do. And of course, anyone else as well with ideas what we would like to achieve during these 2 days.
I think the only one I could add is, or actually just reiterate, stress, is that I think it's very much open what we want to do and what we're going to do. So it's really up to this workshop and all the following workshops, what we're going to do and whatever you're interested in or what you think could be done in such a framework.
All right. We don't need to discuss what we're going to do. We can just do it also during these 2 days. And then I will hand over to you. Slides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm point 2 of lines 1 to 3. I've been invited to the strategy workshop of the BNBE in last December, together with David Kleinhans from Next Energy. So the strategy talk, energy system of the BNBE is the Ministry for Economy and Energy of Germany. So the ministry set up a round. They already came in summer and asked, yeah, we'll make this round. So there is a round of energy system modelers since, I don't know, end of 80s, 90s. But they wanted to big up this round and to bring more aspects inside because so they saw that a lot of things are developing in this subject. So in summer they started to go around to see what are new aspects to the energy system analysis. And so we brought in this open source modeling. They invited us to the strategy talk. What I do is just to revise a little bit what happened there. So they want to strengthen the research of energy systems, and they want to find out the crucial facts. What should they involve in the research? So the research funding for us, it was really good for us to be there because we could really spread in our ideas, and that is what they take to plan the next funding period. So, and And it was also the protocol. Those who read the protocol, our points were in, so we really managed to get the openmod-initiative in. And thanks to Eva, the flyer was ready, and people that asked us for the flyer, it was really good to have it. Yeah, there were about 40 representatives of universities and research institutes. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, just why was it? So one big point was the open data. Like everybody was saying, let's okay, open data. Though there was, David said that hey, they didn't manage to resolve this the disagreement about open data because there were some who said there are already enough open data. We have all the data open, and others who were really complaining that there was no data, and it was kind of. But the models are so different. So some of the models are just using the data which is available. Other models use other data. So there was really, they didn't really discuss it to resolve this problem. But anyway, we were the only two people talking about open models. Everybody started to talk about transparency and replicability of the results. But the discussion what is necessary to replicate the results were not so, yeah, they said, yeah, okay, we have to have this models fact sheets, we have to have open data. And then the open model, it didn't come up to the open model, but it was in this phase. Yeah. We were starting discussing it, but there was not so much time for discussion. There were a lot of, you could say you want to have a statement of 5 minutes before, so when you were registered for statements, we registered also for statements, you could say something, but the time for discussion was not so good, and it was important to this. Okay. Yeah, there was only a short discussion about this. That is public money. When they found the project, it's public money. They have to be open. So most of the people didn't want to discuss so much. Okay, then in this discussion they were also talking about the data sheets, what has to be in the data sheets. We had another discussion then also in December of the project, and they really, the ministry, they really go for this data sheet that they can differ the models and what they include, what they don't include. Well, you see, like that, I thought both the first, the other one you were with us, so they really always insisted in this model fact sheets. So I think it's a really good idea to have this breakout group to talk about that. Yeah, quality assurance, well, point, request, request for more interdisciplinarity. There was only one university who had social scientists. There were one social scientist in the whole round of 40 people talking about the energy system. And he insisted that we have to work together with the social sciences and not only with the technicians. And he was the only one who knew. Everybody said, yeah, interdisciplinarity is important, but there were no ideas like really how to involve them. Yeah, and then there was a short discussion about linear and nonlinear optimization, and is it important and how they can differ. Yeah, out of this workshop, they planned it already before. They wanted to have this workshop, and after the workshop, they founded the Research Network Energy System Analysis for Germany. This link, who doesn't know it, so we registered, and I think everybody can register. I'm not sure, but I think as much as possible of our group should register for the network. And the aim is to link the research results of the energy system analysis projects that they support, and to discuss the results. And also, there's one publication of a research course, so they will publicate the research course with that link. So everybody's invited to go to the network.
So this was just started by the ministry after this
round? Yeah,
oh, okay.
after the round. And they sent it, I think they sent it in January, and then another, they remember, in February or March or something. Yeah, and then I have one slide which is not about the ministry, but I forgot to put it as a breakout group. Maybe we can make it up later on, I don't know. But we think for the point two, also for the public. Okay, my English works. You see? Okay. We want. No. Okay, we want to have a. We think that the conferences we go to are mostly on the analysis, mostly on the results of the simulations. So we would like to establish a conference about the simulations, really about the techniques, about how to make the models, and that's why I went to the group simulation in the environment and geosciences. I don't know. And this working group, an informatic working group of Germany with different subgroups. And they asked us to make a subgroup for energy system analysis. So they are really, in this group, they really talk about like how it wants to be, what new tools are there, what is a lot of open source talking about the quality issue was one of the issues we were talking about in March. And yeah, so then we suggest that we establish a conference of the open source modeling, energy system modeling, modeling, and yeah, I think we would make a group or something like that. And after this workshop, then we can work on it. So that would be our aim is to have a conference next year is a small conferences in Germany, and then every 3 years are European conferences of the European informatic groups, simulation groups. So we want to link in there because we think it's a good environment to talk about the models. That's it. Any questions? Remarks?
So in the from PTJ and the EU, is there persons that seem to be interested in that idea that we could maybe even do that group or at least have a first point of contact when we want to discuss like dedicated open specific projects like the idea of open source or
yeah. So Karl Hanninger is the one who came to me in summer and he was talking and he said, what am I going to do to include that in the system talk? So that is the one who also pushed in the discussion. He pushed that we could say something. So a lot of videos.
and he's with the other.
Yeah.
And at the ministry?
In the whole workshop, the workshop of the ministry, there were mostly PTF. So PTF, for those who doesn't know the German, the ministry doesn't give the support itself, but due to an association. So the association is always looking at the project. So, this is PTF. So mostly we talk to PTF than to the ministry. They are talented. And it's mostly the PTF who is really enforcing that.
Okay. Yeah, so I will be also relatively brief. Mostly brief because I do the part as much as I want to do open source projects. Concrete steps for going open source, what is necessary? Questions I ask myself, I call this now. And here's just a couple of thoughts that probably everybody of us who has a model that should go open source share, except for if you're initially like set up a model that's from the start going to be open source. So because the first point I turned convinced your boss and your boss was that this is valid, I guess, for everybody. But you said this as well, Matthias, just now that it's not up to your decision only whether you model and was open source or not. And I think, so what I want to say with this point is that a lot of, especially like the established incumbent level of bosses and people out there in research try to be protective. So that's the old way of doing things. You build your model, you keep it for yourself, you don't want to share it. And there's still a lot of these thoughts around. And in order to have an open source model, and in order to push this process at your institution, you need good arguments, I guess. This was also a topic at our last meeting. And I've experienced that, like, so at the institution at PIC, it's not that people are against open source, right? But I think validly they say, well, if you want to do this, you need a good plan on how to do it because it might fail, or you know, you want to do a radical new thing, so you need a good idea on how to do it. And my idea is that in this, because I'm not experienced with this, obviously, that in this group, maybe there's more people than me, and or that have the same problem, and we can basically team up with this, and not everybody has to invent the same thing again, right? And also with regard to this article, we want to write maybe things to take up, and so for the how-to, so figure out the how-to or the concept or the concrete steps is certainly then the next point, and that's where I'm still stuck. And an obvious candidate is which license to use. We already had a presentation about it the last time. We had a lawyer who invited. It was really interesting. And basically, that I've learned there is a lot of things that you can do wrong as well. But I really enjoyed these licensings. But since I have no idea about this stuff, right, I feel like I can do a lot of mistakes with this illegal licensing. Then a mode of going open source is that you simply upload it on your homepage, and then you say, well, download it there. Then I've learned last time that there's things like GitHub, or so I'm still unsure what is a good mode there because, yeah, for technical reasons. Then how to deal with input data that is closed. That was one of the most sensitive points that this lawyer raised with us, or at least with me, my understanding. And because in our model, obviously, we have a lot of data that is either bought data or it's not publicly available like this. And then I know that theoretically, if you condense it, like if you add things up, you can then publish it again, but to what degree? And yeah, I'm really not sure on these things. Then how to deal with code commenting, because as code evolves over years, you might have some comments in there like, I don't know, can you please check this? Or I don't know, look at the data, or a stupid thing, or I don't know, like you have to go through your whole model because then it's public. You have to go through your whole code, which can be in some cases a substantial amount of lines, and clean up the code basically, which is probably a good week's work, which in this week you can't do other things, right? So this kind of, I mean, there's all these small things in it. How to deal with questions on the code data, that's a big question that I always get when I say we would like to bring like open source. Yeah, well then everybody can just download the model, and then if they don't understand what you wrote on like whatever on page 6, I don't know, then they're going to ask you, but you're not paid to be a service unit basically to people who want to use your model. And then I say, well, I'm not. But then I can't say much more, but in my feeling that's not part of the open source thing in a way, that I should be a service unit. But it seems to be a very big fear within our institute, and I would be happy to hear your experiences with that, or answers to give in response to this concern. And yeah, finally, does open source mean the user should be able to download and use the model as it is, or what users do I think of then, obviously, right? So this is basically the philosophical version of the operational question beforehand. Because if I think that people should be able to download the model and use it, I need to provide much more commenting, much more how to use the model, like instructions and so on, versus when I think it's just fellow researchers who actually understand this stuff, then I don't need to provide as much. I'm not really sure on how to deal with it, because you also don't want people that download your model and I don't know, it's right that it doesn't work because they don't understand it, or I don't know. Like, so these are the types of questions that I get, whereas I don't have very good answers. And yeah, the last point 3 is to do it. But once you have thought about all the possible fallacies and problems that you might run into, and do it partly, it's much easier than if you have a strategy. And that's it from my point. And that's outlines a bit of what I expect from this workshop or from the people around here. We could move on and some points. And I think tomorrow, today, there's this breakout group on the article. That is today. I think in this I would like to be up some points.
Thanks a lot. Are there any more breakout groups coming from that? So maybe that we,
Maybe we can work on the idea behind that.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful to meet up in this last group here and share ideas and listen to the slides, see slides and listen to information. But it's also good that this is a workshop, so it's useful to do some work together. Right? So we got to split up. We have 2 slots reserved this afternoon and tomorrow early afternoon. Split up in smaller groups of maybe 8 people, maybe 5 people, maybe a bit more. And work on specific topics. We call them breakout groups. And I don't know if that's a really sure, but that's not a specific group. Everything calls stuff like this. So we're going to break out from the plenary and small groups work on specific topics. We have a list of groups that we would like to set up. Just to see what we have planned for this afternoon. So Eva plans a breakout group on an article on benefits and challenges of open source. And I would like to have a group working on a best practice catalog for funders. And Simon, the group on open source data, open data for research for collaboration on that issue. That's what we plan for now, but we are open for more concrete plans what to do. We have enough rooms, and so that's not a constraint. So if you come up during the day, now or later, with an idea of that should we do this or that, and put it on the table, and certainly people will be interested in doing that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question to this presentation on Eva. Is anybody in this room who has already worked collaborative on open source modeling on certain platform, on certain standards? Anybody familiar already with it? Yeah, not just I do my own open source model. It's easy because I have to set up certain standards in commenting or anything, or in doing, I don't know, whatever. I can develop my law and I can just put it online. That's open source, I can call it. But collaboration for a certain amount of time for a couple of years, so that it's actually working continuously, being developed. You have experience.
So our model, there are, let's say, around 3 PhD students working with the model, and then 1 more postdoc, and we regularly give master students the model to work and extend it. So, well, usually the challenge is to define clear interfaces of the modules, and we ensure that any extension of the code doesn't break the old code. So if you want to rerun scenarios, you should still be able to do that with the new Java. And well, on the technical side, I found GitHub the best way to do it.
So you're already familiar with these kind of provenance questions, license stuff, and
the model that we're using, it's used by a lot of people as well. Sometimes we actually implement the model to it's more bilateral cooperation. I would say our approach is even very strict regarding the comments So yeah, it's not a continuous online development. Yeah, I myself contribute mainly to some other open source projects on GitHub. This is my one experience, and the other is that we together with Ted is just developing these communication and developing structures. I will say something about that tomorrow. But this this is a process. Maybe half a year later, when we meet next time, we will able to have more. Not all good.
There's like this, there's a language design company that uses a model and develops it further in order to use it. So far, the cooperation was open. Let's see how that goes along. They are surprisingly familiar with a lot of stuff. For example, the meeting said, "Why don't we use that?" But similarly, very early in the process.
But this is definitely being way. You have to have a platform like GitHub or
Yeah.
How is osmosis distributed?
the website. This platform called Connect, which is how a lot of different energy models and things they're all open source. And we can download our courses to this.
And is it collaboratively developed?
No, the way we try to do it is through a forum, so people can contribute ideas through a forum. And we've also tried to make osmosis a modular structure, so people could contribute modules. But it's not really, there's no common way to work on it together as applications. What's that platform? Comment. The website might be energy community.
And can you send the links to the distributor, email distributor?
Okay.
I have a question for all of you. I'm not an energy modeler, but I noticed that there may be at least 10 models present here, more or less. And my question would be, how far are you in these steps? So who is really like struggling with the basics and doesn't have the concept for commenting or reporting the model or making it transparent and who thinks that he or she has already solved all the issues. So just if you would mind to get an impression of how far we all are in these 3 steps. So would it be possible to just raise your hands if you are like, if you say, okay, everything is solved, and everyone else who's struggling along the line. So the questions you raised. So who's done?
Maybe a comment on that.
Yeah.
I was done once.
Okay.
I simply wrote a simple model for my PhD and said, well, I put that online and well, this is open source, and I thought that that's it. And over time I learned, well, it's not. I used a license that's probably not appropriate, Creative Commons license, just because I was contributing to Wikipedia and realized had read the term before that, but it's probably not appropriate for model codes. And similarly, I just uploaded input data that I found online openly, and over time I learned just because if these code publishes data XY online, it doesn't mean I'm allowed to distribute that further. So I thought I had solved most of these issues, and over time I learned I really hadn't. So I wouldn't know how to answer the question.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my perspective, just to explain myself, is I asked myself how can open models be part of scientific policy advice, and how, what is the appropriate way to make them transparent then? Because obviously it's not sufficient to just put them online without any comment. And then my question is, okay, how do you exactly do that? And then all these questions come up, which Eva raised. So do you need a continuous support? Do you need something like a manual or a very large book to understand the model and things like that? So it's these kinds of questions. It's not, I think the uploading is more the technical part, but then the making it transparent, like really transparent for someone who's not familiar with the code itself.
that might be the harder step. And that's the question maybe I want to ask. So who has the concept for doing that? Like some type of writing. I mean, it must be even a special type of language, I would think. It's not, if you want to do policy advice and you want to make it accessible for someone who is not a modeler himself, but at least has some understanding of the energy system, even then you need to, I think, use an adequate kind of language. So you can't talk about any, I don't know, very, very model-specific things in such a description.
Maybe you have to get some definitions about what we're talking about. Because we have, in our institute, we're talking about open source projects, community projects, and open access projects. Which is open source is just, the code is open source, which is maybe what Leon did. He just put it, I think it's a good idea, but it stops very often at the moment when the code is online and yeah, what's going on. Yeah. And so the next step is maybe a community project. You have a plan in your mind how to publish it, maybe on GitHub, how to communicate with new developers. This is what we are now trying to develop in the ZNIS LE remote project. And another thing is open access. You have a finished program which has an application or something, like a front-end graphical user interface or something like that. And then people can just download it, open it, and maybe change the power input and or change some the number of wind energy plants and then start the simulation and get some results. This is what we talk about open access. And so, I don't know, this is just our definitions that we use in our institute, but maybe we should define some difference so that it's easier to know what we're talking about.
Okay, so maybe we can refine the question and do it again so that we can get an impression kind of who's at step 3 and can share some experience about that. Maybe you can ask who has an open access project. I think is the kind of, I will use your term, but I think it's quite useful. It's kind of the lowest level or the easiest one, I guess, maybe. And then the open source and the community project who working is probably the most complex one. I would yes?
I think community project is more complex than just publish your code. But, open access, I think, is something beside.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe
different difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's no further development for the open access project, right? It's just finished, and you can just change some parameters and just run it.
Yeah.
Okay. So does anybody has an open source model thing online? Everything's okay. It works. So
I thought we were just raising hands for it. I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah. Okay, we are now raising hands. Okay, so open source thing that is online, maybe some problems about it, but still working. Okay. And our community project about the energy modeling. Okay, never finished. Okay, just for the impression. Okay.
Maybe for the documentation, I mean, part of the documentation, in my opinion, is in the scientific article. I mean, if you write an article on the model and publish it, then probably that article should contain a pretty good model documentation, right, so that people can understand it. So, for example, when I read Leon's article, and he has got a long appendix, and I think it's pretty clear from that what the model does. I mean, whoever really wants to use the model, I think cannot avoid putting a significant amount of time into understanding the model. So for us, we have a model documentation in every article. We have one report, and it's also on GitHub. And actually, around Christmas, a student from ETH Zurich wrote me an email, and he used the model for his thesis. And it hasn't been graded yet, but apparently it worked out so far. So we understood the model and use it.
On the code basis.
On the code basis. I mean, I think it's probably a good student who has got some computer science background, because I wouldn't claim that we documented or commented it extremely well.
Which language is the model written?
English.
The programming language, sorry. Java.
Yeah. So we also try to give rather long variable names. So, well, when I say English, it's partly correct, because we try to use such long variable names that they sort of read the code. So it's not like alpha times beta equals gamma, but it's like,
for example, that's already a problem if you shortcuts, abbreviations, and then.
I just wanted to raise that maybe it's important to also talk about who's the audience for this model. Or
yeah, exactly.
If you're talking about students or about research people that are colleagues or fellows, then of course they get very fast into the code, even if it's GAP, they maybe already know the language, and they would kind of download it and use it. But our focus is more on developing countries and actually directly to planners and from the government side. And so in that sense, you need to have, if we're talking about an open source model they're going to use to educate them, you need to have all the documenting material with it, you need to have tutorials, you need to have some forum where they can ask questions afterwards, so they can, if there's a follow-up. So it depends really on who's your audience, so what level do you have to get to.
Yeah, I also think it's important to take care of all the legal aspects which in there, but it's also important to do, step number 3, which is to get it out there, basically. Because what I see there's a lot of hesitation about this and that. My experience with open source, most people don't use this stuff, and it's really hard just to get people actually to care about this. We're a very small minority of people interested in this stuff. So it's important just to get it out there so people can find it. And things aren't going to be perfect, but it could be used.
On the target group, very briefly, I think it's important also when you communicate in this initiative. I have the experience that you talk to people who are not familiar, who are not researchers, and you tell them about the stuff, and they get the impression it's going to be a clean website where kind of each and everyone can go online and do their own energy scenarios in 2 minutes without any backgrounds. And that's at least not what I want to do. I don't want to do a clean user interface that produces scientific results in 2 minutes. But I think that's important to communicate, because that's what people then expect. And worst comes to worst, that's also what fun is usually expect from you to deliver and marketing. And I'm not saying that could also be part of the package, right? And maybe that's useful in some cases, but putting something GitHub Gams code is of course something very different than the other audience. For myself, at least, obviously, this experience model as a researchers in these institutions.
I would also support or emphasize the point of it is important to have a documentation dependent on the audience. Because one point is you could also have an information overflow. If you have everything documented, put it all out there, then it gets, this actually a quite big barrier for a broad audience. People with different background knowledge don't understand it. So my point would be that you have to somehow weight the transparency of the model with the information or information overflow. That there is quite a big danger that it doesn't become accessible for a broad audience.
Okay. Anybody else?
Because practical terms. I need to call the restaurant for lunch. We have early lunch at 12 o'clock. I pass around the menu. Please give a mark on what they would like to eat, just that they know roughly how much is each.
Okay. Great. Then we will go on with the next block, 2 talks about transparency in scenarios, and start with Christian. Okay.
Ganz kurz. Also, okay. Okay, I think it's not that important to post this outside, and I will describe it anyway. So I'm Christian, and what I forgot to say in the introductory round is, well, I'm not a modeler. My background is mechanical engineering, and I finished my PhD thesis in philosophy last year, where I wrote my thesis about the role of energy scenarios in scientific policy advice. And one of my questions there was, what do these scenario studies actually try to tell us, and how are the statements? Yeah. Okay. But he said it's not. It doesn't have to be.
They just want to add rough numbers. I scale it up by 20%.
Okay. So I asked the question, what do energy scenario studies try to tell the reader, and how do they justify these statements using the model? So there was a component in my work stemming from logics, basically. What brings me here is my present work. I'm coordinating a working group in the large project Energiesysteme der Zukunft, Future Energy Systems, which is conducted by all the German academies of science, so Leopoldina, Architect, and the Union of the Federal Academies. And this working group wants to, well, say something about the role energy scenarios and models should play in scientific policy advice. And right now, this working group is preparing a statement, an official statement of all these academies on requirements for energy scenarios studies, which are used in public and political debate. And in this statement, we want to say something about open modeling. And I'm here because I want to know what we can write there. Because obviously, well, maybe I start with some points from this statement and then come to the specific question. So we at first thought, okay, what are the requirements such scenario studies, such assessment reports have to fulfill? And then, of course, they have to be good science in them, they have to be scientifically valid. The authors and modelers should be working independent of the, well, ideological or normative beliefs of the ones funding the project. But then, of course, the result should be useful for the one who's giving them the money, and there's a possible conflict there, because of course you have to adapt somehow what you're doing to what the client wants to know. So there can be a difficulty with the independency here. And then there comes the major requirement, which is transparency. We already heard that. And we think it's not only transparency of data and assumptions and models, but also of the role the client and the others involved in the project are playing. So especially the client, so what input data comes into the study by the client. This is one of the questions that should be answered transparently. And the argumentation should be transparent as well. This is basically an answer to the deficit that if you read these studies, you in a lot of cases, you can't really follow the arguments. So in the end, you have a conclusion, and you don't really know, okay, what is the assumption, what came in by the model, what came in by any other source, and so on. So how can we realize, fulfill these requirements in practice? One difficulty is to identify the appropriate measure of transparency. This is something we already heard here, because it's not, I mean, you can say, okay, everything has to be reproducible, which is stated in such a study. But then how do you want to fulfill that in a scientific policy report? I mean, then you basically you need an appendix of that size where everything is documented and another scientist can just pick it up and reproduce it. And that's obviously not something you can aim for in scientific policy advice. So what's the measure of transparency you should achieve? That's one challenge to answer this question. Another challenge is, you have different audiences when you publish these studies, and you even have different audiences inside one and the same study. So, for example, the summary addresses more or less everyone, or at least the decision makers. Then you have the main part, which I would think should fulfill a requirement, something like traceability. So you should be able to follow the argument and should be able to understand what role the model played in general. And then you have the appendix, which then has a totally different target audience, because here you can put in like raw data, more or less, model description and so on, which can be very much technical. So the issue of communicating such a report is in itself quite a challenge. And last but not least, this is the question which is the task here, is the transparency of models and data. And I think you all know in the business of writing such reports, some of the institutes are quite limited in making these models and data open or publish them, because they have to earn money with them. And one aim of this official statement is to say something to the politics, what actually they can change in the general framework of the, let's say, scenario modeling policy advice business. But then there are a few other limitations, and one is the practical one. This is what I asked just a few minutes ago. So how do you actually do that? How do you publish models and data in an appropriate way in scientific policy advice? And I don't have a really good answer to that. One reason is that I'm not a modeler and have never tried to do that, like write code and make it public. So I'm very much interested in the discussion with you then afterwards, what your experiences are with that. Well, and in this official statement, we want to make some proposals, some concrete ways of action. Politicians, the scientists, and for example, NGOs who want to commission a scenario study, what concrete actions they could take to change the up to now more or less opaque practice of energy scenario study writing and modeling. And one would be to establish binding standards for scientific policy advice. So this is something politics could just establish. And I understood your proposal, Leon, to go just into that direction, like best practice or maybe even a recommendation list for politicians. One could also think about establishing a peer review mechanism for scientific assessment reports. I mean, for some of them, you can link them to the peer review process you already have established by the journals. But then you also have the difficulty that in most policy advice projects you only have 1 year time or 1.5, and this is in some journals already the time you just need to go through the whole peer review process. So obviously you can't just say, oh, I published my model in this and that paper, or I will publish that, so I don't have to say anything about it in a report. So it might be an option to just set up an alternative peer review for reports. You also could use advisory boards. The last study by the German Ministry of Economics, the energy reference prediction, maybe a first proposal, use such an advisory board. And then this is the point why I'm here. Maybe you can use open source models in policy advice. But yeah, I put a question mark there. I don't really know if that's a sensible idea. Maybe open source modeling is something for the scientific community only, and it doesn't make sense to really connect it to scientific policy advice. I don't know. So that's it from me.
Any direct short answers or questions? Because I would have one. And proceed.
So I think one initiative that's covered a few of these points is the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change's calculator. They have this pathways calculator online. And what it does really well is it engages with different target audiences through different layers on the same work. So they have one layer which is this detailed Excel spreadsheet. You can go into the Excel spreadsheet, anyone can download it, and you can see what data they use and the reference source for every piece of data. The layer they have above that is this user interface where you can play with these different levels and see how the scenarios change. So it's basically built on the Excel spreadsheet, but a policymaker doesn't need to go in and look at the data. That would be maybe the scientific community that would actually go and verify the data. A policymaker could just look at the interface. And what they've also included is this very, like a very almost child-like interface as well, because they want to promote the energy debate amongst school students and university students. So they have these, it's almost like a game where you have these levels and you can visualize, wind turbines coming up in the countryside, and you can see nuclear power plants, and you can really visualize this. And all of this is built on the same Excel spreadsheet basis. And I think it covers scenario analysis. I mean, I think the scientific community, maybe Stefan should correct me on this, is not too happy with. Everyone's not so happy with this initiative because they think it distracts from doing real hardcore scientific work, and it's just a pretty interface. But the Department of Energy and Climate Change seems to be thrilled with this work. And now China has a calculator, India, South Africa, Belgium, everyone's replicating this work with their own calculator.
Well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I mean, one problem there might be that it's difficult to communicate the uncertainties involved in all this modeling issues, right? Yeah. And that's something, yeah. I mean, that's a core challenge in policy advice in general, and using such complicated models, complicated models especially. But okay, this might be something like even an alternative way of advising not only politics but society in general. So it's something more parallel to writing scientific reports, but okay, it might even be fruitful from both sides.
I think one thing that it does nicely as well is they say take the poison out of the debate. So they say, if you have a problem with anything, then please go in and change what you want and show us your scenario. So then even the uncertainty aspect half gets taken care of, because they say, okay, then you put in better data or better information.
Okay, I will definitely
Yeah, I cross send this.
Okay, then maybe just two little points for me, because I think this year just cannot be really done without just using open source. Just introducing complete open data, open source standards for all of these models used for policy advice. In no other way, this transparency and also the quality can be assured. Because just if many people can have a look at all of it, it can be sure that the quality is assured. I think this is, in the long run, this will be kind of the thing that we done. This, in my opinion, so this the first one, and the other is a lot of more thought and work should be put into this result communication, because modelers and politicians speak completely different languages, so they cannot understand each other, and so a lot of thought and work has to be put in there. So there's one suggestion you made about that, and I think also in Germany this has to be focused. Maybe we need translators for that. So that's really like, what can the models? They are just tools. So what can they say and what can't they say?
Yeah. So just to get it right, You say this is a necessary.
It's a condition, it's a necessary condition. It makes not sure that the transparency is there, because you can also make faults in open source models, but it's a condition.
And if we have time, what do you say to the idea, okay, you don't make your model like accessible for everyone, but you have such a scientific assessment report, and you have 2 peer reviewers and who are experts in energy modeling, and you just make the model accessible to them. So I mean, you could fulfill this in a less demanding way, just by making it accessible for a very limited group of persons. And this could even work out for data which is licensed or something like that.
Maybe this goes too far, no, for the discussion, or maybe just to look at the.
That's just the point we raised also the ministry.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's discuss it.
But now we just have 7 minutes left and 1 more talk also. So I would maybe put this question, because it's quite a big question, maybe even for a breakout group to discuss this question further, if it's not in your breakout group already.
It's your lunch.
Yeah, okay. So if it's okay for you, I would suggest then to continue with the last talk for before lunch, and then, okay, thank you.
Okay, actually my presentation will be very much related to the talk Christian just gave. Well, I'm also part of a graduate school, apart from being an energy system modeler, which deals, which is called Helmholtz School on Energy Scenarios, where Christian was a coordinator. And there we are a bunch of quite interdisciplinary PhD students coming from social science, from engineering, or from economists, and we discuss general issues dealing with the energy vendor. And I think most of you have faced the situation where you find a certain energy scenario study and you think, well, great, those results look interesting, and it's a great study, and they have some information about where the data is from and how the model works, but you're not sure about what is actually endogenous, what are explicit assumptions, what are implicit assumptions, where's that data from. So basically, most of the study lagged a bit in this field, and then we saw, well, hey, wait a minute, we are some very interdisciplinary students, so let's try to tackle this problem. And that's what my presentation will be today. And just some background and motivation. So energy scenarios are becoming increasingly important, and they are an instrument which is used to answer our future energy questions. And on the way up to Berlin, I thought about, well, there's so many studies, just list a few of them, and I came up with those. There are many, many more, and I think you know many, many more. And for both readers and also for modelers, it sometimes can get quite complex to follow this study. So you somehow need a guideline or an instrument how to deal with this in transparency. So as I said, even for the experts around here, it is somehow sometimes difficult to follow the studies. And what we propose is actually quite a simple idea. And here you see an illustration on how complex these connections between input, results, and recommendations can be. In the most simple way, you would say you have some input data, you have a calculation, sometimes it's a black box, and then you have a result, and based on the result, you draw your recommendations. But what we did, we said, well, there's a direct input and a processed input or assumption. So the straight lines are direct input and the dotted lines are somehow modified input. Let's have an example. Well, your model needs the energy demand for Germany, let's say. So this is somehow measured data. We have it from the TSO, somehow measured, and you put it directly into your model. But then in a different case, your model would need the energy demand for, let's say, Berlin. So, but you don't have this data, you just have the energy demand for Germany. So you need a distribution factor, how to divide it down to the energy demand of Berlin. So you do that based on the population or some other factor. So that would be a direct input. And we also illustrate how models communicate between each other. And you could have an output and result, and you modify the result or assess the result, and then it's process output, which then affects the result. So this is the concept behind our idea. And as I said before, we propose then an instrument how to assess transparency in such studies, and it's a really easy concept, and maybe too easy, I don't know, you can tell me that. It's just a list, a single page in front of each energy scenario study, and it could be somehow like a second table of content. And in this table of content, or this list, you have certain transparency criteria. So you have one which tells you something about the model or the assumptions, what are implicit assumptions, what is exogenous, what is endogenous. And then in this, every criterion is linked to a reference. It's referenced to a page within the study. So say model description is on page 36 or something. And then, in the best case scenario, it should answer these questions which arise and which I was asking at the beginning. At the beginning was about the certainty of the result, what's the main driver, and so on. We talked about this before in the discussion. One could argue then, well, to make it completely transparent, let's just publish everything, every piece of it, every source code, every data, and so on. But then this would contradict our premises that we want to make energy scenario studies more accessible to a broader audience. So it's somehow a trade-off between transparency and information overload. Not overflow, overload. And our list shouldn't be understood as an advice or a guideline how to do your energy scenario study. So we don't say you have to put in this method or you have to apply this model to do a good energy scenario study. It's this is still the task of good scientific practice. So that's not the aim of our list. So to sum it up, we have this proposal for you. You could tell us whether it's a good instrument or you think it's suitable. And there's a breakout group tomorrow where we could discuss this more detailed. And I also have some copies with me of this list. And since all of you are expert in or modelers, this feedback would be very valuable for us. Thank you very much.
How are you planning to distribute the results? To distribute your results in publication or?
Yeah, we're not sure about it yet. Maybe it could be somehow working paper. The thing we are struggling now is the if we want to do a paper or peer review to something, we're not sure if the scientific content is enough for that. Yeah. It could be a guideline or something. We have a certain feedback loops from experts. This workshop could be one, but maybe it's a working paper or something published online as part of the as a result of the research group, maybe.
Yeah, we have to found what's Verband of energy models in Germany and then, or worldwide or whatever, but we don't have that yet.
Any other final questions?
Do we have time for?
Yeah, not really for discussion, just for short questions, and everything for longer discussions I would put in the breakout group. And the question, your question, we kind of cut off. We can maybe think about it during lunchtime if we put it in an extra working group later, or if it's kind of fits in one of the breakout groups. And but if you have a short question now, then
yeah, a question for my understanding. The concept, I didn't really understand your concept of distinguishing in between these unprocessed and processed things. Could you maybe explain it once more? So
for non-processed data, input data, we name it measured data. So you would measure the load or something on it, and then it goes directly into your model. But if you just have this data and then somehow modify it, as I said, in our model we do spatial distribution for energy demand based on the number of people who live there, and that's somehow processed. You should indicate that your load you put into your model is not measured or actual data, but it's processed, and you should communicate how you process this data. And same goes for assumptions, and also for results. This will not modify your results, but maybe aggregate it. So you get a dispatch of certain region, aggregate it, and then say we aggregate it that way.
Yeah. In statistics, they use the terms primary or secondary data.
Yeah, maybe that's a better term.
Yeah. It's maybe more familiar to people.
okay, thanks a lot. Okay, yeah, that's I would say we're perfectly on time for lunch. Leon will tell us where to go, I guess.
Yeah, Eva will tell you where to go. She has to read that answer in sorry for the mess on the campus. There's a lot of security issues and people running around, so people might yell at you, just ignore them. As I said, that's not because of us, but because of Merkel. I love the room. You can leave the stuff here. We can leave here at 1:15. We can have lunch at an Asian place. I forwarded them your wishes more or less, but you still have to order what you want to eat, and you have to pay yourself. Because with so many people, maybe start paying when you're done, so we don't use the issue. You can just walk back by yourself, and I'm going to be here from 1:15 onwards.
Can we exit the same way we entered through the
Yeah, and everybody who has a talk in the afternoon.